but I'll get into how to use Beat Detective to do this. Now this same thing can be done. Well, the same thing can be done with with any platform. And also with Elastic Time, but again, it doesn't sound as good in my opinion. So I highly recommend Beat Detective for any analog drum production stuff. Let me not do that actually. But as far as the Beat Detective, you go under Event in Pro Tools, and you select Beat Detective, which I had it open already, so I don't know why I closed it out. But this bar beat marker generation is something that you would use if you were trying to create beat markers for a material that was not in just standard subdivisions, like with standard 16th notes, 8th notes, things of that nature, and it's like a custom groove or something. These are two features. This groove template extraction are two features I rarely use. It's used more in commercial styles of music when you want to kind of create a custom groove that's not a rigid 16th note, 8th note, but you're still wanting to sequence, synth material or other, quantize other analog stuff to something that's not exactly, an even thing. Most of the time in rock and metal, you're pretty much going to be on standard subdivisions stuff or whatever. With the exception of quintuplets or whatever, there's no feature for quintuplets. So anything with a 5 quintuplet, you're going to have to do manually, which Blake has done that a few times between the Barry Meets drummer, and but everything else that I do, like I said, you got your options for 16th note, 8th note, 32nd note, and then all the triplet versions of that, the swing fill versions of that. But yeah, let me get back to, so the first thing I use in Beat Detective is the region separation feature. Now, like I said, I've already done this section of the audio on dinner break or whatever, just so we can get through it quicker. So like I said, this takes an hour per 2 minutes of audio, even with this. The manual quantizing usually takes me about an hour per minute of audio on average. So it's a significant, this, like I said, it literally is half the time to use Beat Detective. But like I said, I know just from looking at this, there's some 16th notes to the click in this material. So I'm going to analyze this section. It's important to note that with the Beat Detective and with doing this, obviously you see here, it creates loads of regions. So you don't want to do any more than like a couple minutes of audio at a time, or to bog your computer down probably. Even the fastest, most crazy computer, because we've got a lot of tracks going on here. We've got a couple kicks, couple snares, and then this is a small kit. Some of the kits I record, like Blake's, are just crazy. We're running like 20 mics and 30 mics or whatever. And so it's like, doing the quantizing, it can really create a lot of regions and bog your computer down. So like I said, try to do this in 1 to 2 minute chunks, and then consolidate. Once you're done, consolidate the regions. I'll talk about that here in just a minute. It's a feature in Pro Tools that turns all the separate regions into one big long region.
Crossfades them all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you want to crossfade before you consolidate, of course. But then you can throw away all the small, tiny regions, because you won't need that information anymore.
Yeah.
And and that keeps your system running smoothly. But the region separation, it's as simple as this. Like I usually analyze the stuff that's with the closest mics, like the inside kick. I analyze the top snare, the toms, and then the cymbals. I was like, "Where's my hi-hat?" And it's on the other track here. But yeah, and then the hi-hat and ride mic. The room mics I leave out because you remember what I showed you earlier. They're actually later than the closer mics. So, but I want to cut the region. I want to cut each beat at the closest mic and preserve like I said, preserve this phase relationship, if that makes any sense. And Tommy, you can chime in if what I'm saying makes no sense, because
No, yeah.
I'm sure, because I have a tendency to assume that people know what some things are.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not very up to
up to date with Pro Tools.
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
Logic guy, so.
Does what I'm saying make any sense? I just don't. Just
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
people watching, just so they don't like. They're like
I mean, if
"What?"
I knew this program better, I would.
Yeah, I mean, in all reality, like I said, I mean, I figured this out on my own. You know, it's not easy, but it's not
Yeah.
rocket science. You know, just sit down and mess with it, and just think of the goal of quantizing is put the drums on time. Do what you got to do that. If the Pro Tools isn't working for you, or if Beat Detective is like acting weird on a part, these are just tools, and they don't work perfectly all the time. A lot of these plugins and like sound replacement plugins, they work perfectly like 85 to 95% of the time, which is great. It saves you time. But there's times, like I said, that's why I wanted to show you the manual quantizing, because you might have a feel that just Beat Detective is messing up for whatever reason. The algorithm's not working, so you're going to have to go in and just manually paste the stuff. And this region separation feature, which is the first thing to do, is no different, because it works. It separates the region from most of the stuff, but not everything accurately. And I'll show you one thing I have to do. So I'm analyzing all the attack. Let me take this room out. The bottom snare I'm leaving out because it's a little later than the top snare. Does that make any sense? Mm-hmm. I'm going to capture that selection. I'm going to analyze it. I'm using the high emphasis, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is high frequency emphasis. So I think it's analyzing the high frequency of the drums, which most of the transient lies in the high frequency, you know. So it's analyzing that information from the source material. And then I'm going to select everything. If you zoom in and you look at it, see how it's preserved that relationship here, and it's cut the beat at the beginning with a beginning of the snare. This is actually off. I'm gonna have to fix this, but that's because it's weird that Beat Detective like analyzes in order of the track. So since you played this tom a little bit earlier than the snare, it still picked up the snare as the cut point. But these are really easy, quick fixes or whatever. But you'll want to just mess around with the sensitivity. You know, I'm assuming this one's like my machine. Mine usually does best around like 24, 25. I'm thinking the new Pro Tools is different. I've heard it is. As far as the setting, I know the old Pro Tools LE was different. It was like the best setting was like 8. I don't know if it's relative to the algorithm and the processing bit rate and all that stuff, but
the goal is just to get it to drop.
to get it to cut up as accurately as
yeah,
possible.
transient.
And since mine works at 25, I'm gonna choose 25. Okay. Normally, you want to kind of look at it and make sure it's cutting up as much as possible, but just to save time. So we've trimmed all. You say we just pretend I looked through all that stuff and just made sure it was cutting as accurately as possible. Which I know it's missed some stuff. So let's go through and fix that before you actually quantize. The quantize in Beat Detective is actually called region conform. That's conforming it to the click track, or conforming the time. But before I even get into that, I want to make sure the region separation is accurate. Go back to my group. And I want to cut, I want to make sure the cuts are proper. See, I want it to actually cut at the beginning of that tom, the very first thing it's hit. Mm-hmm. And this difference is fine, it's a flam. And it's ways that you can keep the natural, like I said, if you program the drums, that wouldn't naturally be there. It would be perfect on time. And that's part of the human element that gets lost. These small flams are kind of gives it character and gives it push and pull. And so what I'm doing now is I'm fixing the cut points. And if you notice, I'm leaving the kicks separate. That's because the kick's the most isolated drum, and not so much with this style of music, but with like metal, you really need to be able to move the kicks. The double bass parts, how people get sloppy with the kick drums, or they just.
We got a question about that.
Yeah.
Actually, when you edit the kick drums separate from the rest of the kit, are there ever problems with hearing the kick in the overheads?
Yes, that's a good point. Sometimes there are.
Okay.
And that's why you'll see in El Levy's course or whatever on Creative Live, he actually uses trigger pads.
Yep.
So if you got a drummer that's doing like a lot of shred double bass, like intense, just black metal, just crazy stuff, it's kind of good to either tune your kick and use a soft mallet so that the bleed's not an issue, because you're going to be moving the kicks. and you know you're going to be using triggers, and or just use a trigger pad. You know, that's a very good way to deal with that. But usually, like I said, there's if you've got a drummer who's pretty solid or whatever, you're not going to know. Like I said, the kick drum is a more isolated drum. You know, you'll get a little bit of, just as long as their kick work is not crazy off. If it's usually so off that it'll be, you know, if it's so off that it's going to be noticeable in overheads, like I will know it. Like you're usually talking about anything like 20, 30 milliseconds or more, you can hear as a distinct flam. And if it's that off, and you know, from say like a kick and snare that's supposed to be together, if it's that off, then I just usually have the drummer do it again, or I'll copy and paste from a comparable hit in the song that is more on. You know, there's a couple different workarounds to that, but yeah, that is definitely something to look for, just to make sure that you don't have a fade. And sometimes you'll hear some editing artifacts in recordings that really aren't a problem in the mix. You know, that's another element. You can listen to it with some guitars and see if it's going to be a problem. I mean, I've heard, you know, Killswitch Engage, for instance. I've got some of their isolated tracks from the Guitar Hero leaks or whatever, and I heard in one of their hit songs that they had they changed the kick drum pattern. It's still on the overheads. You know, when you isolate and listen to the overheads by itself, it's in the song where the kick pattern was different. And they were like, I guess they decided after the fact, hey, let's make the kick drum more simple. So they simplified the kick drum, but you can't hear it in the mix, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, and they had the budget. They could have retracked the whole thing if they wanted to, but they're just like, man, let's just edit it. You know, so it's not really it's not a big deal unless it's a big deal, unless you can hear it in the mix. And I'm sure everybody's heard those David Lee Roth isolated track. Yes, it sounds awesome, but there's just so much stuff that's in the mix you would never know.
Yeah, you can hear page turns.
Yeah, that's a thing. Like when I was younger, I thought that, you know, you have recording environments, everything's isolated, and it's supposed to be perfectly clean. And I used to think I was doing things wrong by having some bleed from headphones in the vocals and stuff. And you know, that's in professional, big budget recordings. I mean, obviously you want to minimize that kind of stuff, but it's only a problem. It's probably like Tommy remembers we recorded in my parents' basement, and it, you know, we recorded all live in the same room. I'm talking the drums are in the middle of the room, the amps are in the same room, and
It was about the size of this room.
yeah, and you know, obviously the sound quality, these are demo types. You know, I didn't have gear or whatever, but the sound quality, I mean, as far as isolation, it was almost never a problem. You can't hear it. Maybe in the headphones you might be able to hear a little bit of ghost guitar stuff, you know, if it's a little different or something like that. But it was, you know, I learned early on that
And it worked well for that material.
that style, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
that
kind of
first record,
supposed to
it
be
worked.
aggressive and raw, and you know. There's certain styles, you know. I know Dave Matthews. I think they track kind of all together in one room, and
Oh yeah.
certain styles. And what I'm doing here, like I said, I'm double checking, see how this region separation, it missed this tom because it was a quiet, you know, it was like a lighter tom hit. This tom track here, see how the tom was hit a little earlier than the snare. And I'm gonna just leave that. I'm not zooming way in and you know, cutting the drums like right on the sample. I'm leaving it kind of, you know. I mean, this is still gonna sound precise, you know. But this is one way, and I'll show you, there's a setting in Beat Detective that kind of preserves a natural type organic feel to the drum performance. And just let me know if I'm being too long on any of this stuff. We need to move ahead. But this stuff I think is essential for people to know, and it's like I do education sessions, and everybody asks these same process questions. And this applies to drums, it applies to the stuff I'm going to talk about later, like with guitar quantizing and stuff, you know, so I don't have to reiterate later the stuff I'm talking about now.
So we got a question. In a real situation, do you quantize the whole song by default or just sections of the song that you feel need it? So like if it sounds really tight on, let's say, the verse, do you just automatically quantize it anyways? So
I
that
usually
you don't,
do.
yeah, just so
Yeah.
you don't have to deal with anything down the line when all of
Yeah.
a sudden the guitar maybe feels weird and you go back and you realize it's the drums or something like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of, there's a couple scenarios. Like I said, sometimes I get records to mix that weren't tracked. They were tracked to a click track but weren't quantized. So everything is not on time. So I don't want to quantize the drums and then have to go back and quantize everything, vocals and all that stuff. So I might just, tighten up the kick or quantize a certain part of the drums that sounds kind of off or whatever. But usually for the projects that I do, unless the client comes in with a reference and hey, I want our record to sound like an old Black Sabbath album, we're not quantizing. If because that's part of that sound is not perfect and whatever. But if they bring me anything relatively modern and it's pretty much spot on time, then I just in my mind I'm like, okay, we're just going to quantize. Even if, like I said, because most of the bands I have, unless they just are adamant that they don't want to quantize, they're like, look, we want to, because it's a lot of hard work to get it spot on time, and just want to make sure I don't go too far. Okay, cool. But it's a lot of hard work to get it on time, like they tracked back in the day.
Yeah.
And this is bizarre here, but I'll deal with that later. But a lot of people, like with BT Bam, we do everything natural and organic, and Blake tracks for days, I mean, it's just over and over, and he's stabbing the snare drum and just screaming, and and it's like most bands don't have that time and budget to just burn the clock and do it over and over again.
Even back in the day, people would spend a year on a record.
Yeah, I mean,
in the studio.
yeah.
Like they'd write it, record it.
Black Album, it's
like
6
that-
months tracking.
That just doesn't. Nobody can afford to do that.
Yeah, under ideal circumstances, it would be awesome if everybody could just get up production. But like part of the modern thing is, like I said, everything's custom being on time, and it's just
Hurry up.
and it's these are tools to help make it quicker. Like we can get a solid take like Tommy did, good dynamics, and focus on the stuff that I can't fix. And now, like I said, I can easily fix the the timing issues or whatever, And like I said, most of this would sound fine unedited. It's obviously pretty close as it is or whatever. But there was a few kids here and there that are a little ahead or behind. Like and if we were going to like, hey, whatever goes, this is what's going to be the final product. I would have been like, let's redo this part because this is a little ahead. We didn't have to do that. Plus there's other reasons. Like I said, in case like this song doesn't have any sequence material, but in case he ever decided to do a techno remix, it's ready to go, Or say somebody wants to use this song for a commercial and they're like, hey, we want to use this verse riff underneath this show or something, but we don't want any of the vocals or the chorus or any of that stuff. They can just grab it, loop it, and it's all perfect. And they have to do no work, and you're more liable to pick up and use the product than say somebody who wasn't quantizing. They're like, oh man, we're gonna have to do a bunch of work to get this to actually work and loop properly. So then they're like, well, just find another rock band or whatever, Unless you're Aerosmith or somebody, that's kind of how they work. But I've gone through, like I said, I've already done this, quantize all this, but the first the first 30 seconds, I've gone through and made sure all my regions were trimmed properly. They're not 100%, but they're close enough for our demonstration here. But like I said, now I'm gonna show, there's two different tools. Pro Tools has the Beat Detective has a tool called Region Conform, which works. I like the actual, to go under the event, you go under event operations and go under quantize. This one works better to me when you just select audio regions. It works better than the region conform, and I don't know why. I don't know why it's different, but I can show both. And with my system, and I think they fixed this or changed this with the newer versions of Pro Tools, but with region conform, the audio has to be to the right of the click or right of the grid for it to work. Let me see if this one does this. I'm gonna see. Okay, these are obvious eighth notes to the click. So I'm gonna select eighth notes. Let's do these 4 beats. Capture selection, let's see what happens. Yeah, see this thing comes up and it just jacks it up. But let's undo it. If I nudge everything to the right a little bit, let me set my nudge to like 10 milliseconds or something. Let me nudge all this. Now if I nudge it to the right of the click, same 4 beats, eighth note, capture, selection, conform, and it worked. Bizarre. But let me put it back the way it was. If I select these four beats and use this one, audio regions, it works. This one's just better. I don't know. So all you guys looking at home, just know that this one's better and use that one. I know it sucks to have two things open, but whatever. I mean, maybe DigiDesign, if you watch this, fix it. Maybe you have, I don't know. But see, then, like since all these are eighth notes, I can just, randomly grab a. See anything? Was what I'm doing making sense here? Mm-hmm. So I missed this. This is actually a tom hit. And after you do this, like I said, I'm doing it all visually just because I've been doing this like a million years. But I recommend listening to what you're doing, so stuff doesn't get. Like I said, you can look and tell that things are going on time. To me, if you know a little bit of theory. Mm-hmm. And here's, like I said, here's the 16th note relative to the click. So I'm gonna change this to 16th. Grab a couple beats here. And it moved it to the proper 16th, and it should measure at 125, I think. Yeah, see, it's 125. So the computer's just doing the work for us. Now, like I said, for instance, there's settings you can. This is strength setting, and I just had it on 100 because I honestly forgot to talk about that. But you can reduce this, and this will make it a little more random. Let's do it extreme just for demonstration purposes. Let me put it off time. If you do that, these shouldn't be exactly 125 anymore. It should be like, well, it is. But. Okay, I see what's happening. Like it's still a little off the click. You see what I'm saying? If you do this, if you reduce this strength thing, you do 100% strength, it's going to put it on the click. So by reducing this, you like I said, you have a more natural type, a little bit of push and pull, like preserves what the drummer did more so. But like I said, I already kind of left some natural element in there by not chopping it up so precisely. Yeah, leaving some of the natural flams in there and things like that. So, and this is before you consolidate, you can quantize it, fill in crossfade, listen to it, and be like, you know what, that's too rigid. Yeah, let's go back through and let's like undo it a little bit, and you can do that, All this is like kind of educated guess stuff. So like I said, keep the original just in case you want to revert. Let's see with this, like I said, we got eighth notes. So I'm gonna just grab all this stuff. Tommy played close enough to where we can just so we can move through. Now, obviously with metal or anything that's changed, if you're changing time signatures, anything of that nature, you're gonna have to do it in smaller chunks. Like, a lot of people, they'll do like a fill and triplet, the whole song's in 4 and then just fills and triplet or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so you'll have to change settings for those parts. But since this is straightforward, we're able to just kind of rock it out. You get an AC/DC style band, you could probably quantize all the drums with this feature with one click. If the drummer was solid. Because there's no, there's almost like, there's mostly just eighth notes. Okay, so this is where I think this is where I left off. And for those of you watching, there's Creative Live has tons of other, awesome, talented producers who have gone through drum quantizing in probably more depth than I do, and have different takes on it and stuff in terms of, what tools and things like that to use. So you could definitely check out that stuff. But pretty much that's it. So I've got the, this is quantized. The last thing, you notice how like it creates these gaps. Yeah. And obviously if you listen to this, it's gonna be glitchy sounding. Let me play a little bit. And we got the volume down in here so we can't hear loudly, but I'm sure that it was kind of glitchy sounding to those of you at home. And I've already filled and crossfaded. But the next thing we got to do, and the final thing, and our next to final thing in the quantizing of drums with Beat Detective is the fill and crossfade feature. So we've got to basically heal these splits. So I'm going to select the edit smoothing, and I'm going to use this fill and crossfade. You could use fill gaps and then crossfade it manually yourself, but I just usually use this, and the default is like 5 milliseconds, and that sounds fine to me. And you'll look and see what it does. If you zoom in, and see the things,
okay.
it's processing the phase, and this takes a minute. But what it's done,
That's
I
cool.
think,
You can do that to all of them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's still, like I said, you look and I highlighted all this and did it to all of it. But I think what it's done, I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I feel like it's just copying and pasting some of this waveform, and somehow it knows what the transient of the information is and what the actual resonance. Because with drums, like with cymbals, particularly cymbals are just white noise in essence. You know, there's a little tone and pitch in there, but it's predominantly white noise. So just as long as you don't have the transient of the cymbal in there, you know, you can copy and paste the white noise and it's undetectable. You know, it's not detectable by, you know, the human ear or whatever. So it's just somehow it's deciding what parts of the waveform to copy and paste and to fill in those gaps so that it sounds natural for us to listen to. And it, yeah, instead of the whole, like I said, elastic time stretches and compresses the audio, and it's like if you have a pretty wide gap, like some of the, you know, drummers who aren't as solid to the click, they might have quite, you know, off subdivisions, and then they have a few beats that are radically stretched. You would hear that. It would sound like, you know, like weird, you know, and you can hear it in the final mix. Like, you know, I've mastered records, and I'm like, they did it with elastic time, or that was Logic, or, you know, Cubase. I can hear, like, if they didn't use Beat Detective or whatever. It's kind of crazy, but like I said, I've already done this portion. Let me double check to make sure all this is correct. But like I said, the final step in drum quantizing is just the consolidation. Let's pretend like, you know, let's pretend that we've listened to this whole song. Like, okay, this thing is perfect. All the quantizing is accurate. I'm pretty confident that most of it's good, and I can fix it if not. So, but let's just say it's good, and then we want to consolidate it under the edit feature here. This region consolidation in Pro Tools. I'm sure other platforms, does Reason or Logic have something like that?
I think so.
Maybe
I
Bounce
yeah,
or something.
yeah.
You know, something like that. But basically, we want to take all these little regions. Yeah, X back up. So these little regions have created crazy amounts of actual files in our virtual file cabinet here. And that if you get too many, like if you're doing like between the Buried and Me, you know, they have like 70-minute albums, 80-minute records or whatever, and it's like, you know, if I had kept it all, the computer would just be like old school, you know, Commodore speed. But like I said, I just used a shortcut. I've highlighted the whole section, and I'm consolidating. Now, as you see, what used to be the separate regions are now just big, fat, full regions. And if you've double checked and you're like, okay, I'm satisfied, the drum quantizing is correct, and then you go under this, the region and the region controls here, and just select unused, and it's going to go in here and find all the unused parts. And like I said, we're going to be able to throw them away. And I recommend, so you select clear. I recommend remove and don't delete them from the hard drive in case you need to revert back to an older Pro Tools session or something like that, or backup. That way, you know, you're always safe. Like I said, it's just ideal to keep, like, I mean, what I'm recommending, I don't actually do. A lot of times I actually do throw it away, but it's only because every night after sessions, I make 2 copies of everything. Like, I have everything backed up in triplicate. So worst case scenario, I'll lose like a day's worth of work. And to those, you know, watching or whatever, listening or whatever, I'd recommend you do the same thing. And they make some software systems that automatically back up on separate hard drives. I don't use one of those or whatever, but like I said, every night, and sometimes on dinner breaks, I'll if I do a heavy amount of editing or, you know, a lot of tracking, like I'll just, you know, because there's a lot of time and money invested on my end and for the client, and you definitely don't want to lose stuff. And we all know how the computers are and stuff, like,
Been there.
we're not using what NASA has. You know, NASA has cool stuff that doesn't crash. Like if this, computer crashed on a space station, they don't have oxygen. It's not good. So.
Yeah.
I love how you always reference NASA.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Always reference.
NASA always comes up.
Someday we'll get there.
Yeah,
Pro Tools
I
will
want
be
to
NASA
edit
stable.
with whatever NASA uses for their oxygen on their space station. Something that does not crash. No, but yeah. So in theory, our drums are all quantized, and in time, like I said, I mean, just pretend we listen to it and we're satisfied with how tight it is or how loose it is and that kind of thing. And I'm satisfied, the client's satisfied. So yeah, so if the drums are quantized solidly to the click, then we should be ready to start tracking everything else.